just a second. Speaker. No.
I think it was in the
Oh,
chat.
I know what I have to do. I have to go to the chat. There's Eric Tivers. Eric Tivers is, I'm going to
You can just make
tell
it up.
Oh, yeah, I know. The thing that stands out in my mind about Eric is that he's a great musician, because I've heard him play in the past. And he is also the host of ADHD Rewired, which is the #1 rated ADHD podcast on Apple Podcasts. He's a leader in providing video-based coaching and accountability groups for adults with ADHD. His coaching groups were recognized at the 2019 International ADHD Conference. I heard there was a plug, Eric, for you to get another award for next year's conference. Ari was promoting something for you.
Cool.
He has a master's in clinical social work, and he's a musician. He loves seeing live music. He loves riding his motorcycle, and he's now obsessed with pickleball. So with no further ado, let's welcome Eric Tivers. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. All right, let me get the share my screen here. Make sure that I'm sharing the right thing as well. All right. Share. And okay. All right, you see my slide okay?
Yeah, looks great.
All right, awesome. Let me set my timer here. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and for your interest in learning more about how to make accountability work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Tivers, and I have ADHD. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the founder and CEO of ADHD Rewired. How many of you currently subscribe to the podcast? And you can also raise your Zoom hand too, because I will be asking throughout the this talk for you to respond to stuff using that Zoom hand. But it is wonderful to be able to see actually you. So if you have your cameras on, which I love to be able to see everyone, that's wonderful. But do what you're comfortable with. So, in addition to having ADHD, I am a trained therapist turned coach. And in the summer of 2014, just a few months before I would lead my very first coaching and accountability group for adults with ADHD, I had this idea. And this idea developed as I was reflecting on a recent therapy session that I just had. And to be clear, I was not the therapist in this story. So I typically liked to arrive to my therapy sessions about 20 minutes early. I'd pull up to the parking lot, feeling a sense of relief that I would have about 20 minutes to sit there and then quickly complete the therapy homework that I was given the week before. I was told to work on this between sessions, and technically this was still in between sessions, but honestly, I found it frustrating because I really love therapy and coaching assignments. But there was an entire week between my appointments, which meant my accountability to my therapist was an entire week away. I knew the value of homework when it comes to personal growth work, and yet here I was, a licensed clinical social worker, seeing a licensed clinical social worker working on the homework minutes before my next session, because without that direct and urgent accountability, I could not get myself to work on these exercises during the week, despite actually wanting to work on them. But as you might be learning or might already know, that when you have ADHD, good intentions don't always turn into action. I just wish that there was a therapist or a coach that I could have almost daily check-ins with to keep me on track with my goals and intentions. And since I didn't know of one, I created a program that I would want for myself. So in November 2014, about 5 months after I launched my podcast, ADHD Rewired, which I think this week came out with this 455th, I think, episode. Um, I launched the very first iteration of ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. And as Joni said in the very beginning, in 2019, the coaching program was featured at the International Conference on ADHD as one of the innovative programs of the year, and Attention Magazine wrote about it, calling it a promising practice. So what I'm hoping to share with you today comes from leading almost 1,000 adults through this program through 30 seasons of coaching and accountability groups. And if you ask me what I think from my experience, the most important tool an adult with ADHD can have, maybe other than medication, it's community. It's a community of like-brained people who share many of the common struggles, like procrastination, like overwhelm, like time blindness. Now, this is not a presentation on time management, but we're all probably familiar that in the land of ADHD, there are only two times. There is now and not now. And all too often, we find ourselves scrambling because our brain doesn't register that it's now until it's urgent and on fire. And then once we realize that we have to work on something now, we become activated by adrenaline and cortisol, helping us get this stuff done, but usually at a cost. How many of you get the most amount of work done at the 11th hour? Either raise that Zoom hand, your actual hand. So for a lot of us with ADHD, because we don't feel the future the same way neurotypical brains do, our brain has difficulty activating until it's urgent and until it's on fire. And while this has been a way of life that we've been doing things this way for probably most of our lives, I think it's probably fair to say that most of us would love to not have the stress of scrambling to complete things that didn't need to be frantically done at the very last minute. And as my son wisely told me once, that said, Dad, time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like a banana. All right. So what are the costs of an impaired time horizon? It's stress, overworking, overcommitting, not meeting deadlines, strained relationships, poor job performance, financial penalties, letting people down, letting your kids down, letting yourself down. And when this becomes a way of life, despite wanting to do better, it makes sense why so many of us with ADHD feel so much shame and are often overwhelmed and experience much higher rates of clinical anxiety and depression as compared to our neurotypical peers. So Russell Barkley calls ADHD the disorder of good intentions. Yale psychologist and ADHD expert Thomas Brown has called ADHD erectile dysfunction of the brain because we can't always perform even when we really want to. So what do we do if, as adults with ADHD, we have really good intentions, but a slightly wandering attention? We have to build supportive bridges that can really help us bridge that gap between our intentions and our actions. And that's what today's session is all about. It's about how adults with ADHD can use accountability to build these bridges. So this is what we are going to talk about today. And I'm just going to go to the next slide because I'm trying to manage time here. Okay. So when you think about accountability as a specific strategy for managing your ADHD, if you could maybe put in the chat some of the words or feelings that kind of come to mind when you think about using accountability for your ADHD. Body doubling. Okay. Thank you, Lena. What else? nervous, like let someone down, give money to be accountable. Right. So there usually is a very sort of mixed response to this question, how people think about accountability. But as you said, stress and relief in one, relief because it needs to be done. Yeah, for sure. So let me tell you how I'm defining accountability. But first, I want to address the cooperative part here. The reason I'm calling this cooperative accountability is because we are looking at this through an empowerment lens. So here, accountability is being used as part of a socially supportive strategy for ADHD. And it's driven by self-advocacy and self-determination and interdependence. It is feminist. There are no power imbalances. It is not punitive, and it is not shaming. It is relationship-based. And while many of the strategies I'm going to share with you today can be used with a professional, the focus here is actually on using peer support and doesn't necessarily require professional facilitation. And while many of these things could work in a long-term committed relationship, I do really caution against using a significant other too much as an accountability partner, as it could lead to codependence and parentification of one of the partners. So for the rest of this presentation, I'll be talking really specifically about peer-based accountability. So accountability is simply accounting for what you said you did or didn't do based on previously shared intentions. I want to say that again. Accountability is reporting on what you said you did or didn't do based on previously shared intentions. So it really begins with a desire to do better for your future self. But there really is one thing above all else that is critical for this kind of peer support based accountability to really work. And that's a willingness to be vulnerable. And if you've studied the work of Brene Brown, then you might know how important courage is for vulnerability. And I think that one of the ways that we actually show this kind of vulnerability is by showing up with a learner's mind and a growth mindset. So next, we're going to talk about Patrick Lencioni's work from his business fable, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So in this popular leadership book, Patrick Lencioni uses the characters in his story to demonstrate that at the foundational level, there's a lack of trust or the unwillingness to be vulnerable that actually creates dysfunctional teams. Because without trust, there is no psychological safety, which is critical for high performance teams and really all relationships. And when the purpose of a partnership or a team is to provide each other with mutual accountability, there needs to be an understanding and a willingness to call each other out, to reflect the mirror back, and to address it when someone in the accountability team or partnership isn't holding up their end of the deal. So how many of us here have a tendency towards conflict avoidance? Raise your Zoom hand or your actual hand. So in my coaching and accountability groups, we encourage what we come to call compassionate ass kicking. So with shame and trauma around failure being so pervasive in adults with ADHD, accountability must always begin with compassion. And we must be generous with our assumptions of others' intentions. And at the same time, hold each other accountable. The ultimate goal of compassionate ass kicking is problem solving. But how many of us here, when someone offers an apology for something that was maybe deserving of an apology, do we say, oh, that's okay, or oh, don't worry about it? What I would like to do is encourage you to respond in a completely novel and different way. Accept the apology the same way you would a gift. Say thank you. So if someone doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, if they forgot to follow up with you, right, and they apologize, say thank you, right? Because you were counting on them. So instead of saying, don't worry about it, appreciate them for acknowledging and owning it. Moving next to the lack of commitment. So one of the challenges that we see with getting things done is that we often don't even know what it is that we need to do. And what makes this even more challenging for adults with ADHD is that often we don't even realize that we don't know what it is that we need to do. So later in the presentation, I'm going to share with you some powerful coaching questions that we can ask each other to help us communicate our intentions more clearly. And the fun thing about first practicing asking these questions with each other is that it's always way easier to see other people's shit than it is to see our own. So this gives us a great way to practice asking good questions. Then over time, we can look at our own stuff through a more curious and questioning lens. All right, then there's the avoidance of accountability or not holding each other accountable for our commitments. And this is a big one, but I want to really reiterate that accountability here doesn't mean that you're making someone do something or that you even have to do what you said you wanted to do. What it means that you need to be able to communicate what happened and then determine how you want to move forward. And what gets in the way of so many things in life, it's our pride and ego. We've worked with people in our groups who didn't want to share their weekly goals publicly because of fear that they didn't want to hit it. And that's ego, and that shatters trust because being vulnerable means, yes, you might not hit a goal that you shared publicly that you want to hit. And yes, you'll be asked to talk about it. And the reason you were asked to talk about it is to help you assess what happened and to problem solve. So in Patrick Lencioni's model here, the inattention, I don't know why that's going off right now. That's kind of random. Sorry. So in his model, the inattention to results is really meant for kind of shared business goals. However, in applying this to this model to an accountability team where each person has their own individual goals, the shared goal becomes the commitments and agreements around how people show up for each other in the spirit of accountability. How can I be more accountable to myself? I get asked this question a lot, or I hear people say, I just want to hold myself more accountable. Raise your hand if you've ever said that. Okay, so can we all agree that if one of the core challenges with ADHD is that we know what we need to do and that we have really good intentions, but our actions don't always line up with our intentions? Can we agree to that? So if we can, does this question then of how do we hold ourselves accountable even make sense for someone with ADHD? What if the person's disability wasn't invisible like ADHD? What if instead of ADHD, the person's disability affected their mobility? My guess is that looking at this slide, that everyone would recognize the absurdity in thinking that this person just needs to try harder to get up the stairs, right? Now, I know that not everyone likes to acknowledge this because some people like to think that ADHD is a superpower. Something I said at the Chad conference was that I think that if ADHD was a superpower, this would be Comic-Con, not ADHD Con. But I'm not saying that there's not inherent strengths that may be associated with ADHD, because I do think that there are. But in order to leverage our strengths or our superpowers, if we choose to call it that, we need to fully acknowledge our kryptonite. And this means acknowledging that ADHD is a disability, or at the very least, it's a different ability. And if ADHD puts us in a wheelchair, our job is to build ramps wherever we need them. Living with ADHD means living with an invisible disability. And to build ramps, our first tool to break ground in order to build the life that we want to live is acceptance. And let me be clear, acceptance does not mean that we have to love it. It means that we are continuing to try to understand it and to do the things that we want, that we need to do in order to do the things that we want to do. So instead of asking, how can I be more accountable to myself? I think a better question that we can ask ourselves as adults with ADHD is, how can I leverage more accountability to get myself to do the things that I want to do and that I need to do. Except there is one problem with my analogy here. You need to ask for what you need and not let pride get in the way. About 13 years ago, when I was in grad school, I was looking at the question, what does it take for neurodivergent individuals to be successful at high rates and rate high on measures of life satisfaction? And what the data showed is really interesting. It showed that it's asking for what you need, or what the researchers call self-advocacy, which is one of the three pillars of success for neurodivergent individuals. The others are self-awareness and self-determination. And the reason this is really important and it's really foundational in all the work that I do is that when we compare sort of long-term outcomes, whether it's educational attainment, job satisfaction, whether or not you're in a satisfied relationship, when you compare those with ADHD, learning disabilities, dyslexia, compared to neurotypical people, if you rate high on self-awareness, self-advocacy skills, and self-determination, there are no discernible differences, which is kind of exciting, right? But the reason this stuff is so important and why self-advocacy is so important is that you really can't just sit around waiting for a sign, right? You do have to take the initiative to seek that out. Okay, so if you like the idea of having some supportive accountability in your life, but you want to know, how do I find people to do this with? Well, you are part of this group here at Chad. You can work with a therapist or a coach. You could find other communities online. You can even use social media for some forms of accountability. But what we're talking about today really is peer-based accountability. And I'm also going to be talking about our coaching groups more and how we do accountability in that environment. So when we are looking for accountability to manage our ADHD, the first question we might want to ask ourselves is, do we want an accountability partner or a team? Well, I think a good follow-up question to that is, well, what tends to work better? Partners or teams? Both can work. As I mentioned earlier, I started facilitating coaching and accountability groups back in 2014. So from the experience of having nearly 1,000 people go through our program, I've learned what works, I've learned what works better, and I've also worked what doesn't work quite as well. So one of the things that we found that did not work quite as well was having people paired as partners. And what the data showed in our exit surveys of about 250 members during the first few years of these groups is that the satisfaction rate of one-on-one accountability partners, where people were saying that they were highly satisfied, it was only about 50%. Now, one limit to this data was that the accountability partners then were matched and not chosen. But I was definitely not satisfied with a 50% satisfaction rate. So a number of years back, we created teams of 4 and found a much higher success rate based on how satisfied members reported that they were with their accountability teams. And this success rate was determined by by how members said they were highly satisfied with their accountability teams. And that went up to about 70%. So I got curious. I wanted to know what was making some of the accountability teams or A teams excel while others were just kind of okay. So after reviewing the data from a few of our groups one season, I reached out to some of the members to kind of dig a little bit more. And I wanted to find out if they were doing something different. And it turns out that they were. They were scheduling reoccurring meetings. And I actually had a member say to me, he goes, Eric, you're the one that keeps telling us over and over again that we need to schedule our priorities. And so we did. And that was one of those moments where the very joyous experience where the teacher becomes the student. And because at the time I was only encouraging teams to get together on Zoom to meet, but it wasn't a requirement. The only requirement was that they were checking in a few times a day over group chat. So after I found that the successful accountability teams were all meeting regularly on Zoom at least once a week, we actually started making that a requirement. And then the satisfaction rate of the accountability team skyrocketed. So whether you have an accountability buddy or you were able to organize or join a team, having regularly scheduled meetings allows you to build that trust and to develop a more personal relationship. Because it turns out that people don't really care what is on your to-do list unless they know that you actually care about them. So if you find yourself in an accountability relationship with someone you meet online or at a local support group, spend time getting to know each other. It will absolutely be time well spent. And I'll quote Zig Ziglar here, who said, you can have everything you want in life if you will just help other people get what they want. And I think that's a really astute quote when we look at accountability teams and partnerships. Okay, so one of the first things to establish with your partner or your team is, what is the shared purpose? Is the accountability for day-to-day items on your task list? Is it to report on regular progress towards a specific or long-term goal or a project? Is it both? Is it to report on your exercise routine? Or maybe it's for daily meditation or journaling? The first thing you really want to do is to identify that shared purpose. Then decide on the tactical matters. How will you communicate with each other? Will it be text message? Maybe you'll have a shared calendar or a shared to-do list. Maybe you'll even pick up the phone, or you'll use email or Slack or WhatsApp or Teams or any of the many, many messaging apps that are out there. Are you going to meet in person or over Zoom? You need to find what works best for you and anyone else you're working with. So once you've determined how you want to communicate, then decide how often you'll be checking in. Determining how often you want to check in will depend on your needs and your availability. This is also one of the key shared goals for the success of accountability teams or partnerships. And it's critical that accountability, and if necessary, a crucial conversation take place over the commitment to show up and participate in whatever way it was agreed upon. So in our coaching and accountability groups, we tell people that if they can truly make that time commitment, which includes 3 group meetings a week, 2 team meetings a week, and checking in over group chat a minimum of 3 times a day. So we'll have members post their top 1 to 3 things that they're wanting to accomplish that day, and then update their team at different points during the day. While those 3 check-ins may seem like a lot, it's really designed to be quick and act as a touch point for the plan of your day. And I also recommend having some regular face-to-face time with your partner or your team. And as I said, our coaching groups meet twice a week as a team, but you got to find a frequency that works for you. If the idea of cooperative accountability to manage ADHD is to help bridge good intentions into action, it can literally be used for anything you're intending on doing. So let's start with the broadest category of things that many adults with ADHD struggle with: adulting. So for the next part of this talk, I'm going to discuss how to use accountability as a way to scaffold many of our common executive functioning related challenges. Raise your hand if you have a hard time getting started on stuff. Getting started or task activation or task initiation can be really challenging for a lot of us with ADHD. If you listen to my podcast, then you know that I intro every episode saying that we know that starting is the hardest part. So let's get started. So let me share some actual examples with you of how to use accountability to help you get started with anything that you need to do. All right, so I'm going to read this slide here to you. Okay, so this is actual text message between me and one of my accountability partners. All right, so I've been putting off working on my presentation for the CHAD conference. I'm planning on working on it today from 12 to 3. I'll post a selfie by 12:10 p.m. to show that I've started. If I don't post, then is anyone able to check in with me? And then one of my partners responds, I got you. I'll message you by 12:10 to tell you I'm working on my script. If I don't hear from you, will you message me? If I respond, say perfect, and I'll bet you $1 I'll message you first. All right. So if we look at this brief exchange, I'm sharing with my accountability partners that I need to start working on this presentation, the one that I'm actually presenting to you right now. So I want to draw your attention to something that I think is really critically important here, and that the importance of the onus for reporting is on me. I see a lot of people when they are trying to do accountability, they ask the other person to remind them about something. Doing that puts the onus on the other person, and that actually can create codependency. And when it's done with a romantic relationship, it can create a very unhealthy parent-child dynamic. Then in this exchange, one of my partners agrees to the request and shares a similar intent with a similar request for accountability. So seeing this, I leverage a little friendly competition by betting an entire dollar to be the first one to report, which also serves to engineer a little urgency. So on this slide, this is the same chat from the previous slide. But I want you to also notice the specificity on the time and how reporting would be done with a request for follow-up accountability. And because there's already an established relationship, we're able to do something like make a small friendly wager. And here at 12:01, I take a picture of the slide that I'm working on. And then my partner acknowledges my check-in and that she says that I'd be here to it. And she states that her intent is to get started in 5 minutes. Then 15 minutes later, after her last message, where she said she'd be starting in 5 minutes, I gave her a gentle check-in, which helped her. And she owned that she got distracted and shared that she has now taken action to get started. All right, let's look at another executive function challenge and how we can leverage accountability for it. Well, I say that starting is the hardest part. As soon as we start, stopping may present our next biggest challenge. Setting up accountability for stopping can be really helpful, especially if you know you have a tendency to lose track of time, getting lost in hyperfocus. Or maybe you need to create something that you know can be done in 30 minutes. And because your to-do list for the day is about 3 pages long, you know you really need to limit working on this particular task to 30 minutes. But this task has some creative elements to it, and you love being creative. Combine that with a little perfectionism and a bad case of one more thing itis, and 30 minutes can easily expand to 2 hours. So, similar to starting, when you share with someone that you're about to enter a potential vortex of time, you can let your team or your accountability partner know that you're going to start working on whatever it is. And then if you don't report back in 30 minutes, that you may actually need a rescue squad. You can even do this to prevent an unintended late night binge of Schitt's Creek. So let me be clear. I am not saying you should not binge the next season of Ozark or Ted Lasso or Atypical or whatever your thing is on Netflix. But we just want to be intentional. And this also might be worth saying that even before we use accountability, we want to explore if there are things that we can actually do in our environment to make it even easier to be intentional. So, for example, I've turned off the autoplay feature on Netflix, so watching another episodes requires at least some action on my part. And as we'll get to shortly, a good question from an accountability partner might be something like, all right, so what would make only watching 1 or 2 episodes easier for you? All right, so here's another text exchange, letting my partner know my intention is to watch 2 episodes of Schitt's Creek. Again, I share my intention because I know that I may have the tendency to watch more like 2 seasons versus 2 episodes. Then my partner acknowledges the request and makes a counteroffer for a check-in time, which I then acknowledge. Then you'll see on the next slide, I show photo proof that I did what I set out to do. Okay. And again, what the specifics of this are, we don't want to take this as absolute truths, but rather practices that we have seen work for many, many people. One of the easiest ways to share that you did the thing is to simply take a picture or a quick video showing that you actually did it. This eliminates the need to describe in writing and overthink what you're going to say. It's quick, it's simple, and it does the job. We probably all have done the thing where we are literally like writing and deleting, writing and deleting like one sentence that is so insignificant in the content of it, but for whatever reason, we're not saying it quite the way we're trying to say it. Right. So instead of spending like 10 minutes of trying to get that, what you're saying just right, take that picture. Or you can show a short video like this one. So this was an accountability team member who was having a hard time stopping work for the day. So they had stated earlier in that day that they wanted to stop work at a certain time. So they showed with this really short video that they turned their computer off because they needed accountability for stopping. One of the biggest executive functioning challenges that I have, and I see this with so many people that I've worked with, is transitioning, especially leaving the office. One of the things that I've created in my life is lifelines, people just like yourself who understand the struggles that we have. And I know it would be there for me if I needed help with, say, leaving the office. So in this text exchange, I shared my partner that I had an appointment at 4 o'clock, and I needed to be in the car no later than 3:15. And then I said that I would share a selfie. So again, I'm telling them ahead of time how I'm going to report in. Okay. And then there was a request if I need a call or a text. And so I said that would be really helpful if they're around. It's funny, whenever I go through my camera roll, I see so many like selfie pictures of myself in the car because I use that strategy a lot. All right. I've also used this strategy countless times. So this is an actual text exchange, and I have a good relationship with this person. So I say on the phone, I really need to leave my office, but I'm stuck. Will you stay on the phone with me while I pack up and leave? And we discussed how we will respond to each other in these moments. So while the response maybe sounds curt, it was actually exactly what I needed, because what I don't want is to distract the other person and then get into a long conversation. So they say, sure, hurry up because I'm working on something. Right. So I know this is not a time to get into social chit chat. They're just hanging on the phone with me while I get out of the office. Okay. All right. And so the whole idea here is we want to make it easier to take actions on our intentions. We could use accountability for things like screen time or drinking or any other activity where you need to exhibit good self-regulation and impulse control. Or maybe you have the intention to decrease your screen time. So you have someone who shares this goal with you. So at the end of the day, each day you share a screenshot showing how much screen time you had. And yes, we can use accountability to help our attention. You know what? There's a pretty good chance that if you have ADHD, you're not focusing on the things for as long as you would like or need to. So focusing or sustaining attention and effort towards a goal can be especially challenging. This is especially true for things we'd rather not be doing, or for those things that are boring but important, or I like to call them important, or those things that require a lot of mental effort. Accountability in this area can make the difference between you getting 90% across the bridge and actually crossing it. So far, the type of accountability I've discussed has mostly involved asynchronous communications, like text messages. But for accountability that helps you stay on task in real time, there is a strategy that doesn't necessarily require the same level of commitment and a team, uh, and that is body doubling. So body doubling, or the practice of having another body with you, either in person or virtually while you're working on stuff, is not a new idea. The body double doesn't even need to be working on anything related to what you're doing, but ideally they are working on something. And the agreement is that you are each there to help each other stay on task. Okay. I know people who have reported that they go to work in a coffee shop because that serves this for them. Even outside the ADHD community, the growing popularity of co-working offices for independent contractors and the self-employed and online co-working communities where people work together on camera is testament to the effectiveness of using positive social pressure to stay focused. And I think because of COVID, more and more people have been recognizing the real value of having others to just share that space with when it comes to getting things done. So back in 2014, when I first created our coaching and accountability groups, Adult Study Hall was one of the components of the program, which is why at that time I purchased adultstudyhall.com, and I had every intention of doing something with that. That was back in 2014. Then finally last year, to meet the growing need for virtual co-working, we created an affordable online membership community for the ADHD community where people could get access to Adult Study Hall without having to go through one of our coaching programs. One of the reasons that I wanted to present on accountability is that accountability embodies one of ADHD Rewired's core values, and that is growth through community. So in May, when we launched adultstudyhall.com, where we offer a platform that provides access to a dedicated 24/7 Zoom room where people work with other adults with ADHD. We also provide guided study halls where we have facilitators helping people get started or even clarify the scope of their tasks, provide a midway check-in and an accountability report at the end, where each person gets to share their progress as well as anything they learned or would do differently next time. We currently offer guided sessions for cleaning and decluttering, for exercise, for writing, job and career search activities. We have one called Task Busters, which is where you come in with your dreaded tasks and you work on them. Um, we have a one called Create With Me, which I actually finally got to participate in last week, and it was really amazing. Where how many people have these creative pursuits that we want to be spending more time doing, but we don't, right? So there are all kinds of things, and we have members that are suggesting and sometimes offering to lead some of these sessions based on, because we know that people sometimes are more highly motivated when they're taking a leadership role. I know I am definitely that way. So if there's something that you're interested in leading, we try to create that space and that structure to help you lead that for the community in our program. Body doubling can be used for all kinds of activities, from doing your actual job to other things like laundry or cleaning or decluttering. But it could also be used for a ton of self-care activities as well. And when we prioritize self-care, it really makes it so much easier for us to take care of everything else. How many of you find the act of making appointments one of the most effortful activities prime for procrastination? Yeah, me too. Um, or what about working out? I'm sure that we are all familiar with that experience of really not feeling like working out, even though you know that you're going to feel better afterwards. One of the ways accountability can help is by having a workout partner. And that could be someone who's actually working out with you or someone who you text with to check in on that workout. How many of you have sleep procrastination? You're tired, but there's always one more thing you just got to do. All right. So if you have a hard time with getting yourself to get into bed and turn out your lights at the intended time, one of the things that you could do is, if you find someone that has a similar bedtime as you, is you can even like hop on a call or a Zoom call on your phone and just kind of go through your evening routine until you actually get into bed. And then to take that one step further, because we know from the time you say, good night to that person, to actually going to bed, lots of other things can happen. So if you're using a sleep app, like Sleep Cycle, for example, you could send a screenshot and exchange those screenshots with each other in the morning so you can actually show what time you actually went to bed. Now, I don't know about you. I have a love-hate relationship with both meditation and journaling. I love how I feel after doing it, but I still feel a lot of resistance toward doing these two things on a regular basis. You can use accountability to do these two things together, either in person or virtually. Before COVID, I was meditating about twice a week for an hour, sometimes two. And the only way I was really able to do that was I found the meditation meetup in my community. So whatever the self-care activity is, tell your partner your intentions and report back on them. And then ask your partners, your team members, to ask you about it if you happen to not report on your progress. I don't know about you, but I find the process of planning vacations really overwhelming. Last year, I took my first real vacation in over 10 years. My favorite band, Fish, was playing 4 nights on the beach in Mexico at an all-inclusive resort. This was a bucket list item for me. And I know for sure that that trip would not have actually happened if I did not have accountability for the planning of that trip. Diet is another area that can accountability can work wonders for. And this is true with a lot of things. Sometimes accountability can work just by informally telling someone else your intentions. Um, Earlier this year, actually last year, after I put on the COVID-19 plus a few, I wanted to get that weight off. So I got stuck after about 15 pounds. So I decided to do Noom, which is a psychology based weight loss app that has actual accountability with coaches and others doing it built into it. But what I really liked about it is that after I told a bunch of people that I was using it, some people were then asking me if I was still using it and told me that they were now trying to use it after they heard that I was using it, which when I was still using it was really motivating to keep me going with it. Even Weight Watchers support groups use this kind of model of checking in as part of their model. Now, I will say this, and this is a really important piece because I know that for some people, when they hear me talk about like diet and weight loss, there's just a lot of stuff wrapped up in this. If you have a history of disordered eating or any body image issues, I would absolutely say work with a professional, and I would say don't use Noom, since part of the program actually has you weigh yourself every day. And for some people, that just puts them in a not healthy headspace. For me, it just keeps me on track so my weight doesn't get away from me because I have yo-yoed my weight for a lot of my life. And I am also happy to report that I have lost and kept off 35 pounds since February. So it's worked for me. Thanks. How many of you struggle to take good, productive, restorative breaks? So whether it's a 10 to 15-minute walk or even just getting up to go to the bathroom, there are a bunch of ways you can use accountability to take breaks. Now, did you know that people with ADHD, specifically women, have a higher rate of urinary tract infections? And I think it's because we just keep working through even having to go to the bathroom, which is not good for us. So there's a couple of things you can do with taking breaks. So this is something we do in our adult study hall program. So you can use a site like cuckoo.com, which so if you're on Zoom with people and you want to do a Pomodoro style timer, this is a real simple web-based program that has a timer with a link. So you drop the link in the chat and then everyone's kind of on the same Pomodoro cycle. One of the things that I do once a month in our adult study hall membership community is that I host a 2 hour and 15-minute Pomodoro dance party. This is what we do is it's a Pomodoro style. So the traditional Pomodoro technique is you work 25 minutes using a timer, then you take a 5-minute break using a timer, repeat that for a couple cycles, then you take a longer break. What we do, what we found worked better for what we do for our Pomodoro dance party is we do 50-minute work cycles and 10-minute dance breaks. And I'm actually not this Thursday, but next Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern is the next one. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter what you find helps, do what works, but doing so requires self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-determination. Because when you have these things, you're going to find it so much easier to actually achieve your goals. So let's talk about goals for a moment here. So I could give a whole talk about goals, but that is not this talk. But I will say this: goals give direction. Goals inform the actual activities of our days and weeks. And if we can identify even a few critical activities to do every day or week and take regular actions around those goals with the combination of time blocking and accountability, we can sustain effort towards a goal and actually achieve what we set out to do. How often do we have a task or a project that we need to do, and we really believe that we know exactly what it is that we need to do, only to discover that we have no idea what it is that we need to do? Okay, so whether it is a big goal or a small task related to that goal, if you can't clearly explain to someone else what it is that you need to do, there's a really good chance you might not know either. Right. So, and this is where learning a few really good questions to ask your partner or yourself can come in. And this really serves as a forcing function, creating clarity and specificity about what really needs to happen and by when. So, mastermind groups have become increasingly popular with entrepreneurs who are looking to solve business related challenges. And this model works beautifully with solving ADHD related challenges. We've been doing mastermind sessions as part of our coaching and accountability groups since the very beginning. We used to do them in a larger 12-person group. Now we have the teams run them on their own with some guided support. We find that both actually work really well. And the premise of the mastermind is that you're coming to the group or to your team to get help solving one particular challenge that you're having. And by the end of that session, you're going to make some commitments around, which include we have our members watch the video replay of their session and post their commitments that they're going to make. Right. And with our groups, we have our team to continue to ask each other about the progress that they're making on whatever the outcome was of that mastermind, not just during the group, but often beyond the group. We have a lot of people in our coaching program who will continue to meet with their accountability teams way after group is ended. So I am a huge believer in the power of really good questions. And I think for a lot of people, when they are trying to solve challenges, they brainstorm solutions. And I think that overlooks one of the most essential and surprisingly productive steps in problem solving. And that's what Mary Lee Adams in her book, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, calls question storming and question thinking. These powerful questions can help you or an accountability partner take action sooner, make progress faster, and focus on the most critical actions. So questions like, all right, what's the first step? Or when will you start? Or have you scheduled it? Or this is from the book, The One Thing, and they call it the focusing question. And what's the one thing you could do such by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? Or to call it the awe question. So when you're asking someone so what they could do and they come up with an idea, so awe stands for and what else? All right, so you come up with an idea, great. And what else could you do? Great. And what else could you do? Right. And when you get that response to I don't know, when you ask someone if they don't know, or they respond they don't know to what they can do, saying like, imagine you didn't know. What might that look like? Recently, we had an interesting discussion recently that apparently millennials really hate this question about imagine you didn't know. They're like, I just said I don't know. So I don't know how if that really generalizes, but maybe it does. It's something that I'm kind of curious about. So let me ask you this: how many of you love to give others advice? Yeah, because it's rooted in the human desire to be helpful. So if giving advice, if being helpful is your aim, I'd like you to consider moving advice giving to the very bottom of the list for ways you can be helpful. And yes, I do recognize the irony of me giving you advice about not giving advice, but words do matter. And it's not just what you ask or say, it's also how you ask or say it. And being and part of asking great questions requires being able to reflect back what you see. So some powerful phrases, some reflecting phrases might start with, so whatever you're observing, right? So you see that someone doing something that like, oh, I clearly see what the problem is, right? We can rephrase that and have more of this non-judgmental observer position. I wonder, or I'm curious, or what if, or do you think? Or after you ask permission to maybe share an observation, start it with, it seems that, because doing this is called hedging. And doing this is going to reduce the other person from getting defensive. What we need to keep in mind is that we all view the world through our own experiences, and therefore we need to be mindful that we are not projecting our own views and beliefs. So be a mirror, reflect, and don't project. And don't should on each other, right? Like you should do this or you should do that. Right? Share what's worked for you, share what you've tried, but let the other person on the receiving end decide if they want to do that or not. And in case I wasn't already clear about this, ask permission before offering advice. And when you ask permission, wait for an answer. Don't just say, can I offer you some advice? And then just launch into the advice, because I've seen that happen before. The goal of supportive accountability is to help each other take actions on our intentions. And if your goal is to experiment to figure out what forms of accountability work best for you and in what situation, then experimentation is what we have to do. Because here's the thing, you can try to do all of the things and you can do them well. And yet sometimes, to quote Brendan Mahan, who's the host of one of our network podcasts, ADHD Essentials, sometimes the ADHD wins. And in just a few moments, I'm going to show you what supportive accountability can look like in action. But I also want to share with you that it can be hard and it's not always going to work. Sometimes people will ask for accountability around something and still not do the thing. And yes, sometimes this can happen repeatedly, which is why it is so important for us to start from the assumption that everyone is doing the best they can at that moment. I use supportive accountability in a lot of places in my life and with a lot of people. And yes, there are times when I don't respond or I go radio silent. And yes, there may have been a time when I saw a message from one of my accountability partners asking me if I was working out, and I might have pretended that I didn't see it because I was not only not working out, I was sitting on my bed scrolling on Facebook. So, you know what I did? Later that day when I met with my team, I owned it. I outed myself. I shared exactly what I did, that I saw the message and that I was stuck on Facebook. And you know what they did? They thanked me. And they asked me questions. They encouraged me. They also owned some of their shit too. Two of us identify that when we don't respond about working out, it's probably because we're either scrolling on social or playing a video game. And we both agree that if either of us says we are planning on working out and then we don't hear from the other person, that we will resort to extreme measures. We will pick up the phone and call the other person. Brene Brown says that shame needs three things to survive. It needs silence, it needs secrecy, it needs judgment. So one of the things that supportive accountability relationships can really do for adults with ADHD is to create a space to practice shame resilience. So instead of silence, we speak it. Instead of secrecy, we share it. Instead of judgment, we meet it neutrally and with empathy and compassion.
Eric,
Yes.
you did ask me to give you a heads up, and it is 9:05, and
Okay.
we do want to leave enough time for questions, but I know you're almost at the end.
I am almost at the end here. Let me see. All right, let me go through the next series of slides is really fast. So give me like just 2 more minutes and then I'll answer your question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, shame cannot survive when we shine the light on it. And it is really amazing what can happen when you foster a spirit of reciprocity around growth in a truly supportive and shame-free space. It makes working on the harder stuff easier and when you feel seen and understood. And when we experience psychological safety and feel connected to others with similar challenges who also want to grow, real growth happens. And the less we hide and the less we're trying to masquerade as normal, the more resilient we become, which really leads to greater, more sustainable growth. Okay. At its essence, supportive accountability is a method of problem solving. And most challenges I've seen are solvable. So as I said, for example, when something that I do and other people do is they have this tendency to go radio silent, right? And so I've shared the strategy that if I go radio silent and someone needs a response from me, they have a question for me, if they can kind of give it to me as a multiple choice question, they're going to increase the chances that they get a response from me. Now, and the more we can create a safe space for learning and getting back up, the better we all do. Okay, let me get into some of the fun, like here's what it actually looks like. So this is I asked members of our coaching and accountability groups in our community to submit pictures that they've shared with their accountability teams for accountability. So the next handful of slides I'm going to show you are actual pictures of people from our coaching groups doing the things they said that they would do and then reporting on it. So this is one of our alumni who so that they needed to clean their space. And this is a strategy. One of our coaches, Kat Hoyer, she actually uses this a lot as well. She says about 30 minutes of a time-lapse video you can watch in about 30 seconds, I think she said. So it's kind of that reward for doing the cleaning. Here's someone who wanted accountability to organize and clear their desk. We have these before and after pictures. And someone who wanted to do the Marie Kondo method of organizing their drawer. And someone who wanted accountability to make breakfast. So we got from the preparation to the actual food. That dish may or may not still be in the sink. I'm not sure. We have accountability for someone who wanted to work on creating a mind map of their values. So they took a picture when they were first starting, another one showing progress, and then another one when they finished. We have one of our members is a professional composer, and so they were working on composing. Oh, it looks like I did clean that sink. Someone who wanted accountability to make a smoothie, or working out, or walking the dogs, or putting on pants. And the one in the Minecraft creeper scientist monkey trainer costume, that's my son. All right, so what I shared with you today comes from a culmination of nearly 1,700 hours of facilitating coaching and accountability groups, applying and adapting principles from books on business, leadership, communication, coaching, and accountability, and layering it on top of scientific and experiential understanding of ADHD. Okay, let's go to the question part. And I just want to share it too that if you want to learn more about kind of what we're doing at ADHD Rewired, you can go to our website at adhdrewired.com. You can find information about our coaching groups, our study hall program membership, our podcast, and we have registration going on for our winter sessions right now. Our next registration event is on Thursday. All right, let me come out of that share screen. All right, what are the questions?
Do we invite people to put the questions in the chat or to unmute yourself, wave, and or not wave and ask Eric, any questions you have? So I have questions if nobody else does. So Eric, you have a particular thing that you offer, and you offer it virtually. Do you think it makes a difference for people if it's virtual or in person?
So our coaching groups are they are intense, right? And it is really designed to be kind of that boot camp style, like it's because it's 3 days a week. The commitment is about 10 hours a week for a 10-week period. So it's really people who are really looking to dive in really deep and kind of do that full immersion. Um, I tell people, and I always feel this way very strongly, especially at after the chat conferences, that virtual here on Zoom, it's a distant second best to in person, right? But there's a lot of advantages too. It's this convenience, right? It's a lot more accessible. But as far as that connection piece, I don't think you can really top being in person. But it's a second best that doing this online.
So is there, aside from this very intense program that you offer,
Mhm.
is it's unclear to me how someone can either get something started on their own or find something that's maybe a little less intense. Getting started is an issue.
Absolutely.
So what recommendations might you have?
So I think that our adult study hall program is actually a great place to start because there are more and more of our members are sort of self-organizing, and then they can post events. Like I know this one that's a weekly accountability check-in on their weekly goals. And so it does have that structure. There's also there's Facebook. If you have there's a different ADHD groups. When I say that this stuff doesn't require facilitation, it does require a leader, right? Because if it's sort of that idea of like, well, if everyone's in charge, then no one's really in charge, or so having. And one of the things we do in our groups is we establish specific roles. Like, and we identify a team leader like in that role. So that definitely is a component to that. But this borrows from a lot of different models. Even like 12-step programs, there's a lot of overlap between what we're doing here in our program with the 12-step model. It's that idea of sharing and supporting and being there for each other. But I think that sometimes people overthink it, but I think that the most critical aspects are getting stuff scheduled and then getting that commitment made. Right?
So we need a leader.
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally. And you're saying it's better with 4 people than with 2 for adult study hall?
For the accountability teams, and the reason is because it's like we all have those ADHD days where our brain is just not cooperating with us. And so if it's only 2 people, like, well, then the other person who is having a day that's decent, but they still need that accountability. If their partner is, if their ADHD is winning that day, is that then you're kind of without that support. So that's why we find that the 4-member team has worked much better than the 2-member team.
Okay.
I have a question. So lately, I've actually been trying to give myself like self accountability by putting a post-it on my bed, writing the night before like some goals I have for the next day. And that's been working very well because pretty much throughout the day, I'm just thinking about that list and kind of like that's my main focus. But what I've been struggling with is for some of the I haven't been completing all of my tasks, and I don't know that balance of okay, well, it's good that you're doing some, or should I just roll over my tasks to the next day? But then I worry that I'm going to start getting overwhelmed, that it's going to go from a 3-point list to like a 10-point list in a few days. So I'm looking at my list right now and I don't have 2 things done, and I'm most likely gonna turn on Netflix after this. So I'm trying to figure out if I should just, uh, I don't want to use the word procrastinate, but roll that over for the next day.
I love this question. Um, what does anybody else see that list? Like, is there anyone that you live with that is also seeing it? Or I think you may have just froze. Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry. I think as soon as you started speaking, my connection got messed
Okay.
up.
Is there anybody else that sees that list?
Yeah, my girlfriend, she she actually helped me come up with the idea, and
Okay.
she
So you
posted.
are using, so there is some accountability there because somebody else is seeing it, right? So
The service.
is your connections being wonky?
Yeah, but I also, I don't want to. I am trying not to like depend on her as a check-in because you're right. It could become a parent-child type dynamic. But when you were also speaking about pictures, I actually set a reminder on my phone that I was going to go to Target, get certain things, and I sent her a picture of that, and not of like reassurance, but just like kind of that self rewarding
Mhm.
feeling. But no, other than her, not really. I mean, it just helps me keep that in my head the whole day, so I don't get sidetracked.
Yeah, sharing our intentions with others can be a really powerful activator, right? All that being said, actually, there's, in the ADHD community, there seems to be this belief that we are the only community of people who don't get everything done on their to-do list every day. And I'm going to tell you that is not just an ADHD thing. The
Hmm.
thing that's an ADHD thing is that we think we're the only ones that aren't getting everything done on our list, right? One of the things that that the takeaways that a lot of our coaching group members will have is that they'll realize that they actually are more productive than they were giving themselves credit for. They were just literally scheduling and trying to do too many things in a day. Which is like one of the big things we do throughout the 10 weeks is we do time predictions and time tracking. Because all scheduling is built on that, and because we are asking our members to really time track a whole lot of stuff, which is tedious and kind of boring. We have them check in and give a time tracking report every Friday or at the end of every week, as another layer of accountability. Because it's like, you say you have 10 things to do. Are these 10 things that take 5 minutes, or are these 10 things actually like a month's worth of goals, right? And
Yeah.
so it just takes practice and experimentation and iteration and self-compassion, right? And I think that this is why I think group is such a powerful modality. Because like when we hear somebody else being really hard on themselves, we like kind of want to jump in and like, you're doing great, you're being so hard on yourselves. And then we start to like hear ourselves kind of saying the same thing that we're telling others that they're being hard on themselves for. And then we're like, oh, wait a minute. I'm kind of being an a-hole to myself too. Right. So one of the things I like to say is that like if I thought that beating ourselves up and being really hard on ourselves was an effective way to get stuff done, then I'd probably come up with some creative exercises on the best way to beat yourself up to get stuff done. But like self-compassion, especially when you're in struggle and have goals you're trying to achieve, right? That's courageous and that is hard and it is the only way forward.
I love that, Eric. That's great. Self-compassion. And maybe that's a good note for us to end on. I want to thank you. Oh, before I even thank you, we'd like to know, when is the Pomodoro dance party? Could you tell us one more time?
So I'm pretty sure that Ellen's going to be there. So it is next Thursday at let me look at my calendar. Next Thursday at 1 Central, 2 Eastern.
I'm putting it in my calendar as we
Excellent.
speak.
Excellent. And if you are also interested in our coaching groups, we have 2 registration events this week. One's on Thursday, and then we're actually doing one on Saturday. And if you go to the coaching page on our website, if you add your name to the email, the interest list, we will send you because we have a whole kind of registration process. There's a 30-minute video that really goes into depth about the coaching groups, like way more than what we talked about here. It like talks about the content, the structure, all the time commitments. And so we have this registration event. So the next one is on Thursday, and then we have another one on Saturday. So I put the link in the chat for the coaching groups. But yeah, send if you are interested in that, add your name to our interest list because we'd love to support you.
That's great, Eric. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Wow. I wrote a lot of notes, and I hope I remember at least 3 pieces of information. This is great. And, the whole concept of not doing it alone. I love that. And to do whatever we do with self-compassion. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And-
Joni, did you have a question?
I did. I had a really fast question. I hope it's okay. I was just wondering if you do any groups with teens or like with young adults, like with college age kids, where they, they have intentions, but they just can't quite follow through on them. And they can get a lot done when they have the interest in it, but when they don't, it's so hard.
Yeah, not yet. That is something that is on our radar as we continue to grow and be able to get sort of more niched in our group offerings. But we do have college students that sometimes do join our groups. But I always tell people, like, if I get a email from, say, a parent on behalf of their student, I'll tell them right then they're not ready. Like, it needs to be coming directly from the student, right? And they're not joining because their parents are urging them to do it. They're joining because they want to join.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great question. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy New Year, Merry Christmas. And I hope we get to see you in January. And please join one of our support groups as well. All right, good night.
Eric, thank you so much. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. So Joni, do you know how to